Arriving at the scene, the genius Higuruma and his boy Yuji descend from the sky, while in front of them, Sukuna watches with the smirkiest of grins. At an earlier time though, back when the sorcerers were plotting prior to the Sukuna vs Gojo battle, the dog, bro was an actual demon, Kusakabe reiterated their Takaba backup plan. However, he points out he needs to return here as soon as possible. Their main issue is Sukuna. Even if it's an all-out battle, they still have to figure out who they're going to send in. Kashimo, being himself, points out how an all-out battle means everyone will be involved, yet he knows it's him who's rolling in first. Rebuking this though, Kusakabe says there would be no point in sending in people who have no chance of survival or ones that can't create an opening for others. When it comes to the merger itself, Kusakabe lets them all know he has a feeling sorcerers will most likely be able to prevent themselves from being included. Even if Sukuna and Kenny end up getting their way, he doesn't think it's possible to survive the merger when the resulting monster is one that can wreak havoc on the planet itself. No matter what though, he feels like they at least have a few days before the merger might begin, even more possibly if Sukuna is the only one who survives the upcoming battles. Suddenly, Narutoshi Kamo stands up and informs everyone that he won't be able to join them. He doesn't think he'll be of any assistance and would instead like to watch over his family, even if only for a short while. Going to apologize for this, Kusakabe cuts him off and reminds the group that this isn't a public execution and doesn't need to hear everyone's explanations for taking part. Bringing up the conditions needed for those who want to take part, Kusakabe simply lists that they must be able to use reverse curse technique and or don't mind dying. Anyone else will be backup or sit out of the bouts entirely. Raising his hand, the gloomy looking Higuruma offers to go in after Kashimo as his curse technique Confiscate might be able to seal his ability. On top of this, he elaborates that if Sukuna received the death penalty from his deadly sentencing, he could battle him with the executioner's sword. While he acknowledged that the sword is a fantastic idea, Kusakabe was skeptical of whether a verdict for confiscation or death could be ruled. Knowing how the technique somewhat works himself, Yuji confirms that Higuruma cannot control what charges judgment is able to pin on Sukuna, given Sukuna's actions that led to deaths at the detention center and in Shibuya, as well as possibly more crimes committed while possessing Megami. Yuji believes that it's more than likely judgment would give Sukuna a death sentence. However, Higuruma doesn't agree. In short, Sukuna's crimes so far were bodily injury to Yuji, attempted murder of Gojo at Yuji's high school, attempted murder of Yuji and Megami at the detention center, the murders of Mimiko, Nanako, and Haruta, attempted murder of numerous civilians, arson of inhabited buildings throughout Shibuya, and finally, my favourite, grievous bodily harm, attempted murder or illegal possession of a dead body due to him taking over Megami. It's kinda unknown what exactly that last one is, it mainly depends on Megami's current condition and everything. But either way, Yuji brings up how the circumstances of the detention center were far worse than those. Still, Higuruma believed it would be hard to accuse Sukuna of crimes committed by his cursed objects. He did commit these crimes, albeit indirectly, so it wouldn't exactly fall under aiding and abetting. In a similar vein, it would be difficult to charge him with the murder of Junpei's mother. Listing out the varying punishments for a guilty verdict under the charge of murder, a singular kill will typically result in imprisonment with hard labour for 10 to 15 years. For 2 deaths, life in prison or even the death penalty is actually possible. For the murder of 3 or more people though, the death penalty is the most common outcome. Higuruma believed that, according to the Nagayama standard, Sukuna would be completely impossible to rehabilitate, based on the dangers he posed to society. In turn, this would lead to a death penalty, at least under normal trial circumstances. Unable to even compute what bro is actually saying, Miwa looks over at Kusakabe, who seems to understand exactly what it is. However, she immediately calls him out for not even having a clue what Higuruma is actually talking about. Proving her wrong, Kusakabe then explained that while the totality of Sukuna's crimes would result in a death penalty, Higuruma's curse technique tries each crime individually, which means there's at least a 30% chance of Sukuna being tried for a crime that would result in the death penalty. Still, he brings up how each of his major crimes are also attached to a bunch of extremely minor offences. Agreeing with this, Higuruma elaborates that it's possible judgment could actually prosecute Sukuna for property damage or breaking and entering at Shibuya, rather than the massacre itself, which further lowers their chance at securing a death penalty here. Lastly, Higuruma then brought up a third problem. Sukuna could possibly be charged with crimes from over 1000 years ago. and the modern set of laws introduced during the Meiji era had introduced the general idea of a statute of limitations. Yet, later in 2010, the statute of limitations regarding murder was abolished, bringing a lot of confusion into whether or not the previous crimes could actually be brought up, the previous crimes from Sukuna's past, that is. Yuji, just confused about this all, assumes that there's no statute of limitations on Sukuna then. Rebuking him though, Higuruma continues that the statute of limitations is still valid regarding murders that happened before 1985. However, the Heian era's governing rules, also known as the Yoro Code, didn't include a statute of limitations themselves. Actually just done here, Yuji irked asked which one it is, but Higuruma admittedly doesn't actually know himself, especially since the issue is further complicated by time prior to Sukuna's incarnation in modern times. Since Judgment is a Shikigami connected to his own curse technique, Higuruma knows that if he sees something as even remotely possible, so too will Judgment. Taking everything into account, Kusakabe concludes that Sukuna's crimes from 1000 years ago, Judgment's own discretion, and Sukuna's countless potential crimes in the modern day meant that the chances of Judgment accusing him of a crime that guaranteed a death penalty was extremely low. Nonetheless, Hikari thanked Higuruma for his willingness to participate, as even on the off chance confiscation worked, it would be of a great help to all of the sorcerers. However, Higuruma actually points out that he's still unsure if both of Sukuna's techniques would even be confiscated, since he's never been able to trial someone with multiple techniques. Suddenly, Yuji proposed a way where he may be able to guarantee the death penalty for Sukuna. Flashing back to the present, several crows, powered by Mei-Mei's bird strike, fly towards Sukuna. Easily noticing them in time, Sukuna quickly moves to the side and strikes them down with lightning using Kamotoke. Observing this from afar, Mei-Mei notes how sorcerers of Gojo, Kinjaku, and even Sukuna's Calibra all chose to strike down the crows, allowing her to surmise that Bird Strike is probably capable of doing damage to them. That being said, she then reveals that this was all a distraction for Higuruma and the rest is now up to him. Suddenly, a massive gavel strikes down on the ground in front of Sukuna. Having dodged the smash, the demon looks to his right as Yuji suddenly appears next to him, shattering the debris with a rapid succession of blows, creating a dust screen, allowing him to get in close and further sock Sukuna with a strike that sends him sliding back. Confused on the weird feeling coming from Yuji's fist, Sukuna then watches as Higuruma announces that they are having a retrial. In an instant, Higuruma activates his domain expansion, Deadly Sentencing, constructing the courtroom around the three sorcerers. Skipping back and during the pre-planning, Yuji came out with the idea of an appeal. Instead of trying Sukuna, they'll have a retrial for the previous case and actually drag Sukuna into it. This way, it then 100% allows them to charge Sukuna with the massacre during Shibuya. Deadly Sentencing chooses one of 3 court tiers at random when prosecuting. If he applies for a retrial for a case that's already been settled under the pretense of Sukuna being added as a co-defendant, then reopening that case may be possible. Even if he fails to convict Sukuna, this would nonetheless allow them to narrow down the crimes to when Sukuna was incarnated inside Yuji's body. Back inside of the domain, Judgment reads out that Yuji has been accused under suspicion of committing mass murder in Shibuya on October 31st, 2018. Retrieving the case file, Higuruma announces that Yuji never killed anyone. His previous confession in High Court was a false one, motivated by a strong sense of personal accountability. Instead, he postulates that the real culprit is the king of curses, Ryomen Sukuna. Elsewhere in Shinjuku, Hikari and Urame fly through the air, darting over the rooftops as they battle each other. Urame uses Frost Calm, breathing out super cool curse energy that creates a large block of ice while encasing Hikari's right arm in it. Instantly following up, Urame then punches the ice, shattering it and destroying Hikari's arm. Manipulating some cold air in between their hands, Urame thanks Hikari for joining her in battle. In a flash, the third-year student instantly regenerates his arm and grabs the ancient one by the face before proceeding to slam them through an apartment building. By the way, I've always wondered, do you think Urame froze herself and timed a perfect Thor to re-emerge into today's timeline? Or do you think she was like all of the other incarnated sorcerers and was just brought back by Kenny? I don't know. But either way, and back on the ground, Urame slides backwards along the road while creating a large ice spike. She notes that, in terms of regenerative speed, Hikari surpasses the likes of Sukuna and Gojo. Biffing the icicle forwards, Urame lands a fatal strike that pierces Hikari's side. Still, it doesn't slow him down and the actual goat continues to rush towards her. Healing his previous wound, Hikari, having gotten in close now, throws a fat right kick that connects with the chest of the ancient sorcerer. Having fooled Hikari into a false sense of security though, Hiromi grabs the sorcerer's leg before beginning to quickly freeze it. However, Hikari, ever the crafty maniac, opts to break it off, instantly regrowing it and kicking Hiromi with both of his feet. The power behind the dropkick actually launches the female sorcerer through several buildings, giving Hikari enough time to grab his shoe and put it back on. Giving chase now, Hikari stops and listens as Hiromi begins to compliment him. For some weird reason that she just can't seem to explain, these modern era sorcerers have a sick obsession with remaining human. They all so desperately want to hold on to their humanity, constantly telling themselves to hold back from destroying what would be so easily crushed with their own overwhelming power. To Hiromi, it is that human fear of being alone that makes them so weak. Standing opposite Hikari as all of the water below them explodes from the underground pipes, soaking both of the sorcerers, Hiromi tells Hikari that he's different. He doesn't share the same fears as other modern sorcerers, and because of that, she will no longer think of him as a human. Moving into her fighting pose, she states that she will destroy him with the full extent of her power. With the water beginning to puddle around his feet, Hikari remembers a similar conversation he had with Yuta. He knows the man's a little bit of a depressed fellow, but at the end of the day, he sticks to his words and you can't help but respect him because of that. Throwing his hands to the side, Hikari screams that he's getting real hyped up here and demands that the woman in front of him bring him an ice cold beer. Meanwhile, inside of the deadly sentencing domain, Higuruma begins divulging the rules of the domain to Sukuna. Having been given a select piece of evidence, Higuruma thinks that their victory is secured, since the evidence that was given to him was the same evidence used in Yuji's second trial, proof that Sukuna was in possession of the boy's body while committing the mass murder at Shibuya. However, Sukuna suddenly interrupts him and explains that he already heard the rules of this domain when he was inside Yuji. What he's actually interested in is that sword of his. He doesn't give an actual shit about what he did when or where. Wanting to end it here, he admits guilty to all of the charges, causing judgment to sentence him to confiscation and the death penalty. In a flash, Higuruma's domain vanishes, dropping them back down to the ground and changing his gavel into the famed executioner's sword. Standing there with his blade ready, Higuruma speculates that it's likely Sukuna lost his ability to use the Ten Shadows technique during his battle with Gojo. So there's a high possibility that what was confiscated was his shrine. Assuming that he doesn't have a curse technique anymore, Higuruma feels like he's now in complete control with his sword. With this one-shot chance at victory, the Jujutsu High Sorcerers could not afford to let this slip through their grasp, and in the same moment, they all sprang into action. Suddenly, Higuruma stops as he remembers Yuji's words to him. Do you have a death wish? As all of the sorcerers started closing in on Sukuna in the center, the only ones who realized that something was wrong with this seemingly perfect opportunity was Sukuna and Higuruma himself. Rushing forwards, a flurry of slashes suddenly slice into the lawyer and Kusakabe, bringing the duo closer to their incoming demise. Remembering that Sukuna wielded Kamotoke, Higuruma realizes that if the target of confiscation was already carrying a curse tool, then confiscation will take away that curse tool instead of their curse technique. Beating himself up mentally, Higuruma curses his inexperience. Not concerned, Kusakabe activates Simple Domain to protect himself from Sukuna's slashes. Sensing all those around, Sukuna notices that all of his opponents have leveled up their fundamentals in Curse Energy Strengthening. On top of that, yet not to the same degree as Domain Amplification, Kusakabe's Simple Domain somehow weakened his own technique. Meanwhile, Kusakabe, who was almost certain he was about to die, begins to speculate. He knows now that not all of Sukuna's slashes are capable of slashing through the world itself. It makes sense to him that he'd need to charge up the technique in some kind of way, or use a binding veil in order to expand the target of his technique. Kusakabe then breaks down each of Sukuna's techniques and summarizes that Cleave, a point-blank dismantle, and the enhanced dismantle cannot be defended against and will generally result in death. He wonders why Sukuna isn't also using his fire like he did back in Shibuya, but gives up on worrying about that for now. Which I'm actually like almost 100% sure is going to play some form of role later on in the battle. Either way, yelling out, Kusakabe checks up on Higuruma, who apologizes for being unable to confiscate Sukuna's technique. Fixating his gaze on Sukuna though, Kusakabe reassures him that robbing him of Kamotoke is good enough, and promises to put his own life on the line to protect him, since his sword is their best chance at currently defeating the King of Curses. Opposite them, Sukuna jokes that it's good they've upped their defenses, still, He's gonna actually go for their legs now. Jumping in though, Choso fires a piercing blood at Sukuna. However, before it even hits, he asks them for a race, suddenly vanishing from sight. Instantly, he then reappears behind Choso and pierces 2 of his hands through his body, fatally wounding him before tossing him aside and heading towards Yuji. Ino then appears above and biffs Nanami's blunt sword down at Sukuna. Still, he comfortably deflects the blade back into the air. Falling down and catching his sensei's blade, Ino slashes down at Sukuna with it. Despite blocking the blunt sword with his arm, Sukuna feels the strike being stronger than he initially expected. Upon closer examination, he realizes that the curse tool is imbued with Nanami's 7:3 ratio technique. Unconcerned, he throws a fat kick that Ino just barely blocks with his sword, but nonetheless feels the heavy force from it as it sends him sliding away. Darting in from either side, Yuji and Kusakabe go to attack, but are quickly driven back by Sukuna's slashes. Jumping in over the back of his teammate, Higuruma slashes at Sukuna with his executioner's sword, but misses and is instead caught by Sukuna's grasp while being brutally pummeled. Grabbing him by the scruff of his suit and asking if the others think they can keep up, Sukuna tosses Higuruma across the battlefield and through buildings before giving chase. Boosting off in Sal's direction, Yuji screams for them to not let Sukuna get Higuruma alone. Up ahead, Higuruma catches his fall inside of a destroyed building. However, having gone like Mark 3 or something, Sukuna appears before him and unleashes slashes that cut apart the building. Back before everything actually kicked off in this fight here, Yuji informed the others that Higuruma's curse technique could be used to save Megumi. Explaining it himself, Higuruma says that those who were cut by the executioner's sword will die without exception. However, without fail, the target will be limited to the one sentenced. Judgment, throughout the series so far, has demonstrated the ability to distinguish multiple souls with an incarnated body, as seen with Yuji previously. In turn, killing Sukuna with the executioner's sword would allow them to somehow retrieve the sleeping, unharmed Megumi. Later that night now, Yuji asked Higuruma that previously mentioned question: did he want to die? Sitting there, Higuruma explained that he is a man who has been abandoned and abandoned the law himself. In the end, he wants to be the one who punishes himself. To do that, it's just like Yuji said, he wants to fulfill his role and then die in battle. Somewhat understanding where bro's coming from, Yuji agrees with his sentiment, but still felt that Higuruma should stay alive. Telling him to not say such ridiculous things though, Higuruma lets Yuji know that he's turned into someone who can no longer even look him in the eyes due to the guilt he carries. Back in the present, it is revealed that Higuruma somehow used domain amplification to neutralize Sukuna's slashes. Having awakened as a Jujutsu sorcerer only less than 2 months ago now, Higuruma's extraordinary growth with Jujutsu sorcery fascinates Sukuna. He wholeheartedly believes his talent, from the beautiful light that resonates from his lethal blade to his unbound depths of skill, even rivals that of Satoru Gojo. So, what Sukuna is actually blown away by isn't that Higuruma can use domain amplification. He's more intrigued by how he lowered the anti-domain technique, but somehow resumed his original technique's effect after. When Sukuna did this against Gojo, he had to pay close attention to only pause and not completely invalidate Maharaga's adaptation. He too is somehow managing to keep his sword lit between amplifications, and because of that, there is no doubt to Sukuna that this man is able to manipulate curse energy to a similar degree as himself. Fascinated, Sukuna asks if he is indeed Hiromi Higuruma. Simultaneously, with his other hand, the King of Curses forms hand signs, sending out a plethora of cuts that absolutely destroy the building. Yuji, who arrived outside the building as this happened, joins the battle. Standing on the falling debris, Higuruma charges at Sukuna, but is distracted by a piece of debris near his face that Sukuna shattered using Dismantle. Taking advantage of Higuruma's distraction, Sukuna approaches Yuji, who tries to punch him and protect Higuruma. However, Sukuna intercepts his arm and grabs the left side of his torso before activating Cleave, cutting half of Yuji's body into small cube-like pieces. As the bloodied young man falls to the ground, Sukuna tells him to take a good look in the mirror. He's a complete bore, and there isn't a single interesting bone in his disgusting body. As the destroyed building collapses onto the ground, Sukuna and Higuruma emerge from the wreckage and continue their battle. Seeing Sukuna on the road above, Higuruma jumps up and tries to hit him with the executioner's sword. Sadly, Sukuna is able to effortlessly dodge every strike and lands a few strikes that rock the newly awakened sorcerer himself. Eventually, Sukuna gets in behind before jumping away from Higuruma and beginning to chant the incantations for Dismantle. Scale of the Dragon, Recoil, Twin Meteors. Sukuna points his hand forth, activating Dismantle and unleashing a slash that cuts the world itself. As the smoke clears and seeing that he was able to dodge the slash, Sukuna tells Higuruma to give healing himself a go. Higuruma tries to bear through the pain, but knows it's clear as day. No matter how cold-hearted he is, no matter how thorough his resolve may be, the pain is still unbearable. Watching him stand, Sukuna cuts off his other hand and slashes his legs, preventing him from moving forward. Threatening him, Sukuna tells the sorcerer that next it's his head he'll remove if he doesn't heal himself now with a reverse curse technique. As Higuruma remembers his previous statement to Yuji and poses what his role really is, Sukuna is suddenly hit by piercing blood, though he once again comfortably blocks it with his arm and notes that it's the technique of the oldest cursed womb death painting. Seizing the opportunity though provided by the brief distraction, Higuruma immediately regenerates his right arm and heals his legs with a reverse curse technique and seemingly stabs Sukuna in the hand with the executioner's sword. However, in a sick twist, the King of Curses reveals that he cut off his own hand milliseconds before Higuruma pierced it, but commends him for his effort nonetheless. In a flash, Sukuna activates Cleave on Higuruma, causing him to preemptively wince in pain and start to remember a conversation he had with Kusakabe about curses becoming stronger after death. In a moment of selflessness, Higuruma then tosses the curse inside of the executioner's blade over Sukuna's shoulder, allowing Yuji to dive in and catch it. With Higuruma being slashed apart in that moment, he finally looks Yuji in the eyes and tells him that he has done all he can. Recalling Nanami's last words once more, Yuji gets gassed up and prepares to stab Sukuna in the back with the executioner's sword. So that there officially brings us to the very end of what I guess is the Hiromi Higuruma versus Sukuna battle right here. Obviously there were other people that kind of came in and helped out Higuruma with, fighting Sukuna, because I honestly expect if it was on the same kind of level as Kashimo and Higuruma decided to show up and just fight Sukuna alone, the dude probably would have been taken out in say half a chapter or something. But we're not going to dwell on that for too long now. He managed to do a little bit more than I ever expected him, and the dude's growth was absolutely profound. Man is a complete GOAT, and I honestly do hope he does survive. I don't think he's going to come back and ever play a similar role in the series. It's almost like he's passed on his technique in that final moment there to Yuji, even though, he totally didn't. He still have his own technique and everything. He just threw away the sword so that Yuji could get it, but it was almost like passing the baton in that kind of like symbolic nature. Either way, enough of me rambling on as per usual. If you guys have enjoyed the video and want more stuff just like this, then make sure you do hit the subscribe button, as it really helps out with pushing my content to a bunch of new amazing people. Also, be sure to leave a like as well, as it just lets me all know that you guys are still super keen on the Jujutsu Kaisen content and me keeping up with the series and everything. But either way, for now it's been your professional degenerate, Diavolo, and I will see you all in a bit. Bye.